Hey everybody, how's it going? Coming to y'all with another video. This time, it's going to be something a little bit different. I'm going to be tier ranking all of the fantasy and sci-fi books that I have read over the last 2 years, and then I'm going to update this at the end of every year to rank and add in the new books that I've read that year. And this is really more so just for me, so I can kind of keep track of everything myself, but if you all enjoy it, that's awesome. Obviously, I would love that. So let's kind of jump into this. I want to quickly say that A Clash of Kings I am still currently reading, and so I will not be ranking this today because I haven't finished it. This is for books that I have finished. They are reviewed on my Goodreads account. You can go check that out. I'll link my Goodreads in the description. But starting with A Game of Thrones, this is going to go into the A tier, which is the 4.5 and 4 out of 5. You can see how I have these all ranked. So higher on the list will be, the 4.5s, lowers will be the 4s, so on and so forth in each respective tier. And they will be ranked according to my enjoyment. So if you see a book ahead of another book, it does mean I liked that book better than the book that's behind it. So, yeah, Game of Thrones, really fun book, really quality book. It is a 4.5 out of 5 read for me. I enjoyed most things about it. The only issues I really had with it is certain character POVs weren't really my favorite. And sometimes it did feel like it was dragging just a tiny bit. And so I can't quite give it 5 out of 5 territory. Next up is going to be Bleach. We Do Not Always Love You, one of the tie-in novels for the Bleach anime and manga series. This is going to go here. I really enjoyed this. It's a slower read, and it kind of tells the story of what happens in between the end of the Thousand Year Blood War and before the time skip that happens at the end of the manga. And in this novel, we get to see how certain things play out. So we know from the end of the manga, anime-only fans, spoiler warning, click away here, I guess. But we know from the end of the manga that Rukia becomes captain, and her and Renji get married, and so on and so forth, and Ichigo and Orihime get married. And this book kind of tells those stories. It's not action-focused at all, it's just world-building, but it's a fun read, and I really did enjoy it as a Bleach super fan. Now, Can't Fear Your Own World, I'm going to put here in the next tier above, and I am considering all three of them to be one novel because you can't read any of the three light novels standalone, really. They really do all need each other to tell the complete story, so I'm ranking it as one complete story. Really enjoyed Can't Fear Your Own World. This likewise takes place in that time space between the end of the Thousand Year Blood War but before the time skip, and it's not focusing around Ichigo whatsoever. Instead, we're focused on Shuhei Hisagi, Kisuke Urahara, Shunsui Kyoraku, and so on and so forth. While we have a new villain, Tokunaga Suniyashiro, who is a head of a one of the five noble families, and he's basically got his own concoctions and plans to take over the Soul Society by replacing the Soul King himself with somebody he can rule over. And it's a really fun read, a lot of great action. Yes, it is considered canon, just a fantastic story. Possibly the worst book I've ever read, however, is going to be Dark Souls Mask of Vindication. This is the only book I had to DNF. It was because it was so boring that I would be falling asleep trying to read a single chapter, and the chapters are not that long. The chapters are about, between 5 and 10 pages long. And there's a lot wrong with this book. It started really strongly. It actually started feeling very much like Dark Souls, and then it quickly strayed away from Dark Souls. I felt nothing like Dark Souls. It became a generic buddy adventure romp with new people joining the party all the time, and there's lighthearted jokes being made, and we're trying to seat this young man who's still alive onto his rightful throne, and it's just all sorts of mess going on. They were throwing new creatures at us that didn't exist before, but also not describing them, so it's basically impossible to visualize what these things are supposed to be. Basically, it failed as a Dark Souls novel. It failed as a generic fantasy novel because it was just so boring and plainly written, I guess. There's nothing unique about it. I hated my time with it, and yeah, it's down here for a reason. Now, The Summer Dragon by Todd Lockwood. I really enjoyed this book, actually, and I'm going to put it right up here. This was a fantastic read. I did have a couple issues with it that keep it away from perfection, most notably, they throw a lot of different nouns at you, and they kind of expect you to remember everything, but most of them don't come into play until much later in the book, if at all. And so I had to kind of go back and remember, what the hell is a torchbearer? What is this? What is that? And so it really could use a glossary. Now, I've actually spoken with Todd Lockwood, and based on that criticism, he actually agrees and says he will be putting a glossary into the back of the Autumn Dragon and any new prints of the Summer Dragon later. So that should be squared away on later printings. But on the older printing I have, it's unfortunately an issue. The other is there's a character who makes some jokes that are very childish and immature. Like, I'm talking literal fart jokes that took me out every time, and so I can't rank it as highly as I otherwise would, but it's still a very good read. Next up, we have Fable Blood Ties, and believe it or not, I am actually also going to put this into the 4 and 4.5 category. It's on the very low end of the 4-star reads. I'm a big Fable fan, and that definitely helped this book a lot, but it takes place after the events of Fable 3, and it tells Ben Finn's story. It explores, some of his own motivations, some of his own interests. It gives us some world building, explaining the history of the gnomes that we meet throughout the game. The first few chapters, admittedly, kind of problematic, but once I got past them, I was able to really enjoy the book. Next up is Homeland by Ari Salvatore, and we actually have our first top of the tier list book. And I know some of you may click away right there just seeing Homeland above a Game of Thrones, but I do actually consider it to be a better read for my personal enjoyment. It's classic sword and sorcery type of fantasy, but getting to understand Menzo Baranzan was so much fun. Just learning about Drizzt and his home world and his people. I always describe the city of Menzo Baranzan as an entire city of Cersei Lannisters, Peter Baelishes, Varys the Spiders, those types of scheming, plotting characters, which are some of my favorite from the A Song of Ice and Fire world. But we have an entire city full of those types of people. And it's just breakneck action, really fun writing, and it's something I really enjoyed. So you may not agree, but I personally put it in the 5 out of 5 category. Now, Exile is a really good book. I really did enjoy my time with Exile. However, I enjoyed it significantly less than I did with Homeland. I think I'm going to place it here. I think this is where I like it. It's a good read. It's very fun to kind of see the action sequences between Drizzt and a character I can't mention because it'd be a spoiler if you've only read Homeland. But it's a good follow-up. However, I can't rank it near as high as Homeland itself just because the story didn't engage me quite as much. Now, Sojourn, I actually like Sojourn better than Exile, and apparently this is a bit of an unpopular opinion. I loved getting to see Drizzt going out into the world and exploring these new things and these new people and deal with the prejudice that accompanies him simply because of who he is and learning how to kind of find some peace in the world despite that. And this is only the beginning of that happening, but I still really enjoyed it nonetheless. The Crystal Shard, I will say, I think is a better book than Sojourn, though. It's the first book ever written in terms of publication order in the Legend of Drizzt series. And it does show the writing isn't as smooth as the Dark Elf trilogy's writing. However, I don't personally mind that because I think it's got its own kind of classic fantasy charm. It really reminded me very much of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, which is what it draws its inspiration primarily from. But not to the point of feeling plagiarized. It's just good old school classic sword and sorcery, and I happen to really enjoy it. Now, unfortunately, I cannot quite say the same thing about the books that came after it. Specifically, what are those books I'm referring to? I'm referring to the Halflings Gem and Stream of Silver, which are both going to rank here. And the reason why is very simple. For Streams of Silver, I was just disappointed because some of the grammatical errors in the book, the spelling errors in the book, which may have just been a thing from, one edition to the other. Things kind of got mistaken or lost in translation or whatever the case may be, but it's fine. It was a good story, but that took me out of the reading quite a bit. Now, the Halflings Gem, on the other hand, this one took me out of it because I hate the ending of the book. I wanted to watch them reclaim Mithril Hall. And spoiler alert, they don't do that on page. It's basically just a few cliff notes and an epilogue to tell you, yay, they did it. And that was a huge letdown. It took a lot of the wind out of my sails, and I hated that. I really, really hated that. I wanted to see what happened. Now, next up, we're going to have the Stone of Tymora trilogy, which is tangentially related to this the series, the Legend of Drizzt, and here's how I'm going to rank the first book. The Stowaway was fine. It's definitely the worst of the Forgotten Realms books that I've read up to this point. It's not a bad book. I just wasn't super invested in the characters yet. And Drizzt does make appearances in all three of these books, by the way, but he's not really a major focus. He's just kind of there to say, hey, look, there's Drizzt. But the story didn't grab me quite as much. I was interested enough to read the next book, but I wasn't in love with it. Again, you can read my Goodreads reviews for all my particular reasons. Next up is the Shadowmask, and I like the Shadowmask better, but I still don't like it as much as the previous books. It really did begin kind of ramping up, though. It began setting up a lot of mysteries and questions. I would put the Stowaway probably 3 out of 5. Shadowmask is 3.5 out of 5. It's a better book, but it still left me with a lot that I wanted to know, and I still found it weaker than the other entries in the story. Now, finally, we have the Sentinels. And actually, I really liked the Sentinels. And it's going to be the very bottom of that kind of 4 out of 5 territory. It's almost a 3.5, but not quite. It's, I think, better than the others, though, because it did have a really interesting conclusion. I was, at that point, attached to the main characters. I did like the villains and the kind of, somewhat complexity of it all. It reminded me a lot, reading the trilogy reminded me a lot of, like, reading The Legend of Drizzt, but mixed with elements of, like, Percy Jackson and Pirates of the Caribbean is how I would kind of describe it. And by the end of the Sentinels, I found my time to have been well spent. Next, we have Canticle, the first book in the Cleric Quintet. Canticle was good, but I think it's worse than Halflings Gem and Streams of Silver. I'm not in love with it like I am The Legend of Drizzt so far, but I will read the other 4 books in the quintet eventually because I do want to read all of Salvatore's Forgotten Realms content in the recommended reading order, and that's what I've been doing. The characters are fun. I'm not as in love with the combination of the classes of characters for kind of their own party, if that makes any sense. And there were some very obvious kind of plot twists coming. If the Icewind Dale trilogy is very obviously inspired by Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, then the Cleric Quintet so far is like very Star Wars, and you see its plot twist coming a mile off. At least I did. Still a good read, a fun time, just not as good as the Drizzt books. Next, we have the Epic of Gilgamesh, and I'm going to put this here. This is specifically the New English edition, and I want to rank this higher, but the edition that I read kind of pissed me off a little bit in that it told the story of the Epic of Gilgamesh in the book, but it did so after the author decided to leave their own personal interpretations of what everything meant. And so before you read the story itself, you're reading the author's ideas of what that story was and what he believes the symbolism was and the relationships were. And if you do it in that order, it could really artificially color your own perspective on things, which I hate. He should have saved that for after the story. So I take huge grievance with the book for that, but the story itself is wonderful. It's the oldest story known to man, and it really does read like the very first piece of fantasy ever written, which is what it is. Next up is Gunmetal Gods, and now we are jumping up with our next 5-star read. Oh my god, I loved this book. Gunmetal Gods was fantastic. It had the eldritch horror themes going on that reminded me of a combination of H.P. Lovecraft and Junji Ito. It had that dark, epic fantasy feel, much like A Song of Ice and Fire or the TV show Game of Thrones, whichever you prefer. It had real-life kind of counterparts. It was basically a fictional version of the story of the Crusades between the Templars and the Ottoman Empire, but, the Paladins are wielding guns, and there's djinn and biblically accurate angels in play and all sorts of schemes and magic. Just a really good time, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I highly recommend you check it out. Next up, we have Death Rider, and Death Rider is going to go very high as well. I want to rank this a 5. I really do. The only reason I can't is that it's very hard to justify a novella getting that position with the level of content that it has. Barely 100 pages or so. But what it did tell was great. It really doubled down on the horror aspects of the series, and I found that to be fantastic, and I can't wait to jump into Conqueror's Blood next year. And then maybe Elder Epoch and maybe even Dark Drinker all in the same year. I'm kind of making myself pace various series. Next up, Harry Potter, the prequel. We're going to drop this in in the 2.5 and 2 out of 5 tier because this isn't even a novella. It's like 3 pages of content. It's barely even qualifying to be a piece of fantasy that I read, but I did read it. I do have a review for it, so here it is. It's just a little 3-page story about James and Sirius that happened before the events of the Harry Potter books. Nothing really of consequence, nothing we needed, but it was cute. Okay, now into the main Harry Potter books. We have Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, which I'm going to rank right here. I enjoyed Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. It's a great beginning to a story that we would all come to know and love, or many of us would come to know and love about Harry. I don't feel I need to talk too much about the Harry Potter books. We're all kind of super familiar with them, so I'll just move on. But yeah, classic urban fantasy. Chamber of Secrets. I'm going to put Chamber of Secrets above Exile, but below Sojourn. I think that's a good spot for it. I enjoyed Chamber of Secrets quite a bit. I did think it was an improvement over Sorcerer's Stone. It doubled down on the mystery novel elements, and I also just remember loving the book as a kid, so my nostalgia may play into that ranking a bit, but on my reread, I still ranked it higher than Sorcerer's Stone. Maybe a controversial opinion here. I don't know. But Prisoner of Azkaban is worse than the first 2 books. In my opinion, I just didn't connect with it the same way. I felt like the stakes were lower than the first 2 books. I felt like it was more of a setup book than an actual true entry, if that makes any sense. Because it did feel like it was mostly just there to kind of set up the darker plot of the future books. I just didn't love it. I'm sorry. Next up, we have Goblet of Fire, though, and I actually consider Goblet of Fire to be a 6 out of 5 read. And I know a lot of you are going to think I'm nuts, but I loved A Goblet of Fire. I think The Goblet of Fire was the best book in the Harry Potter franchise, bar none. And currently, yes, I think it's my highest rated fantasy/sci-fi book that I have read as of so far. It had everything I wanted out of the universe. We had epic duels, we had mystery, we had tension, we had stakes. It really also brought the series into kind of its, quote, adult years or young adult years, away from the more child novel section and into the YA area. Things got a lot darker. Things got a lot more interesting. And I really, really enjoyed that. So, yeah. Now, Order of the Phoenix, on the other hand, oh, good lord, is my least favorite of the original 7 Harry Potter books. It dragged. I found characters to be petulant and difficult to read, especially Harry in this book. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. I think it definitely went on way, way too long. It was important to the later books, yes, but as a reading experience, I liked it less. Now, Half-Blood Prince can get some more credit. I'm going to put it above Chamber of Secrets. I think Half-Blood Prince was a very good book. It had a lot of very, very memorable moments. Of course, the ending of this book broke a lot of readers' hearts, as it did mine when it first came out. And it still, is very sad to read again as an adult. But I can't put it on the same tier as Goblet of Fire. I think it is better than Chamber of Secrets, though. Now we have Deathly Hallows, which is going to go at the very kind of low end of the top tier. It was a great conclusion to the books. I feel like it wrapped up a lot of the loose ends. Maybe not everything, but enough that I was satisfied. And yeah, it's very hard to end a book series well. Endings are where almost every author struggles, and it can make or break a fantasy series in the eyes of the public. But I think Harry Potter stuck the landing with Deathly Hallows. It is unfortunate, then, that they went on to make Cursed Child, which I'm going to put down here in the kind of 2.5 and 2 out of 5 territory. There are some decent ideas, and that's the thing. If it's not in the very bottom tier, that means it at least had some decent ideas. In this case, Albus and Scorpius's relationship, I thought was really nice and actually fairly well done. The kind of development of Draco admitting to Harry and everyone else that he didn't really have true friends. Crabbe and Goyle weren't there for him the way that Ron and Hermione were there for Harry. and that was a great moment. I really enjoyed that, and also seeing Draco so fierce as a father. Even though I don't like Draco as a character, there are things about Cursed Child that I think are good. There's just a whole lot more that I think suck. However, it's a better book than Magic the Gathering: War of the Spark Ravnica, and that's speaking as a massive Magic the Gathering fan. More specifically, Nicol Bolas and Niv Mizzet are my two favorite characters in the whole world of Magic the Gathering, and both got done dirty here. Niv got killed off screen, which is inexcusable, and Nicol Bolas, he felt like Nicol Bolas more so than most of the other characters, I guess. But a lot of the characters felt very poorly handled in this book. They didn't read like themselves at all. I didn't like it. I didn't like it. It was painful to read. Luckily, The Hobbit wasn't painful to read, and it's going to go right up here to the top tier. This was a classic, whimsical read full of magic and childhood charm. It reminded me of being a little kid and having this book, read to me and reading it myself. It's just a fantastic time, and it's a top-tier experience no matter how old I get. Archangels Fall. Archangels Fall is an interesting one. I think I'm going to place it here. So this is a urban fantasy book about angels. The heavenly host, fallen angels. There's references to demons and some appearances of demons too, who are separate from the fallen. It's a really interesting new book, and it's part of what's called the Lightbearer series, I believe, by Andrew Bryan, who played a minor role on Game of Thrones and wanted to go off to write his own book. I thought that it was a very interesting read, and it makes me want to read the next book he's going to write. I really enjoyed it. There were some things I wasn't crazy about. As an American, I was a little annoyed when the book kind of read as very anti-American, with every mention of Americans being either only to call us cheesy or, say that we have stupid words for things, and that irritated me a little bit. I'm not going to lie. But the premise of the book was really interesting. The quote magic system, if you want to call it that, where these different angels control different kinds of light, was interesting. It's a good book. I do recommend it, especially if you're a fan of things like Supernatural, the TV show. So yeah, I think 4.5. That section of this tier list is a good spot to put it. Next, we have the Murder Complex. I'll put it at the very low end of the 3 and 3.5 category. It's definitely a 3. This is a sci-fi book in a kind of dystopian future where everyone has barcodes tattooed on them, and the classes are divided into different sections of these cities and areas of the world, and they're put into different roles, and only certain people are fortunate enough to get to work. But, nothing super original. We've seen stuff like this before. There's definitely a lot of murder. I wouldn't call the story complex. There's some weirdly out-of-place romantic sections that make absolutely no sense. I didn't enjoy it enough to keep it, nor pick up the sequel. Maybe one day, but yeah, I'm just not crazy about it. Next up, we have Nevermore, which is the first Supernatural book, and I actually really enjoyed this. I'm going to put this above Fable Blood Ties. As a big fan of the Supernatural show, I want to read all of the Supernatural books, and Nevermore was a very good first entry, I feel. It's a solid 4 out of 5. I personally felt like Sam and Dean read perfectly in character. And I also loved kind of the random nature of things. We've got these mysteries going on in New York, and they're resembling Edgar Allan Poe and his creative works of fiction. And so the boys are investigating that, but there's also a haunting at the house they're staying at. And so we have a lot of different things going on. It kept it interesting, it kept it diverse, and I really enjoyed my time with it. Sadly, I can't say the same about Witch's Canyon. Witch's Canyon wasn't a bad book, but it wasn't a particularly great book. I think I'm going to put it here above the Stowaway, but below Shadowmask. It was a decent time. I don't feel the characters read like they should. They felt a little bit out of place. The Monster of the Week wasn't interesting. And honestly, while we're here, let's go ahead and put Bone Key in the same category. Bone Key was a little bit better, but not by much. And yeah, very forgettable, honestly. Luckily, Heart of the Dragon was a bit better. I'm still going to put it right next to the others, but it's definitely ahead of them. This book could have been a 4 out of 5, The only reason why I'm putting Heart of the Dragon in the 3.5 kind of area, and the 3, that 3 and 3.5 section, is because they definitely mishandled John Winchester. For anyone who's watched the show, we know John was a distant parent, especially towards Sam, and definitely wouldn't be winning any Father of the Year awards. But in this book, while he's on a hunt, he's worried about Sam, and he gets him a present so we could see Sam smile whenever he gets home, and it definitely is not a good representation of that character. Now, The Unholy Cause is by far the best of the supernatural books that I've read so far, and I'm actually going to place it right here, above Exile. This was a hell of a book, and it's what I really want to see out of Supernatural's novels, because not only did it introduce new types of demonic threats, but it delved into questions Supernatural fans had for the longest time, which is what is Jesus in the world of Supernatural? And, that's even contested in the book between Castiel and Judas Iscariot. Yeah, that Judas Iscariot. There's a new breed of demon introduced, and these demons are taking over this Civil War reenactment field, and they're using these reenactment cannons, but because of their magic, they're now firing real bombshells, and it's giving us things we could never see in the show because of budgetary constraints, but the characters felt right in line with each other. Really great book, really enjoyed it. And then we have the worst supernatural novel I've read so far, which is War of the Suns, which is here. And this book is by far the worst because the characters didn't read like themselves. Hell, sometimes they read like each other. Having Sam use words like, "You keep that in the pisser," and having Sam punch an engineer in the face because he didn't do what he was told to do, which is not a Sam thing to do whatsoever. And then one of the two villains at the end of the book, it's just Deus Ex Machina, which I really, really hated. Time travel plot was okay, but the love interest for Dean that was introduced in this book felt forced and like a character self-insert. And the other villain was a really interesting concept. I'll give her that. Having an angel turned human turned demon, really cool to see that. But the majority of this book was just not great. Next, we have the Supernatural Men of Letters Bestiary. This is kind of a supplemental piece. I think it's okay. I'm going to put it below the Stowaway. Mostly just because it has a lot of inaccurate information, which really bugs me when it's meant to be a source book for people. Next, we have Wizard's First Rule, the first book in the Sword of Truth series. And, yep, I'm actually ranking this fairly highly. I really liked Wizard's First Rule. I really enjoyed this book. It's a great first entry into the Sword of Truth series. I know a lot of folks hate the Sword of Truth series. I am not a lot of folks. I really enjoy it. I think it's a fun time. Yes, it can get kind of dark at times. It can get twisted at times. But I don't mind that in my fantasy personally. I like Richard, Kaelin, and Zed as characters. I like the world. So, yeah, this is where I'm putting the Wizard's First Rule. Stone of Tears is excellent. It is a 4.5. This was so close to a 5-star read for me. The only thing that kept Stone of Tears out of 5-star territory for me were the inconsistent handling of Kaelin's character. Half the time they had her whining that she missed Richard, and it makes sense. Richard and Kaelin are in love. You're going to miss each other when you're apart, especially when you're separated because of the events that happen in this book where she's feeling guilty for it. But it doesn't befit a character of her status who's also trying to lead an entire collective of countries, essentially, into war. For her to be in the middle of this war and leading these people into battle against insurmountable odds, to also be in her tent, just, oh, I miss my boyfriend. It really bugged me because the other times that she was on page and she was actually doing her job in the book, she was a badass and it was a joy to read. But those moments where she's just pining over Richard really annoyed me, and so that held it back a bit. Dead of Bones, this is the prequel novella. It's fine. I'll put it above Murder Complex. It didn't add anything of substance, is my biggest issue with it. It didn't need to exist. It gives us a little bit of lore and backstory for Zed, but it doesn't further the books in any way, and so it's fine. It's definitely not, required reading of the series. You could skip it and miss nothing. I put it where I did in terms of, the order of the list because my list is sorted in recommended reading order. And, yeah. Next is Blood of the Fold. going to put Blood of the Fold directly behind Wizard's First Rule. I think that this was a very good book. It wasn't super action heavy, though. Not until the very, very end, which is fine by me. This was actually kind of a world-building book. We get to learn about the kind of the politics and the inner workings of the Palace of the Prophets, the Sisters of the Light, and kind of their own schemes and their roles in the world. We get to learn more about the Sisters of the Dark. We get introduced to our new villain, for the first time, really. Emperor Zhejiang. We get to meet the Blood of the Fold themselves, who are these psycho fanatics that are like religious, fervent type of people. It's really hard to describe these people, but basically they're an order of people fiercely devoted to their personal religious belief in the Creator, who hate magic and think that all those who practice magic are worshippers of the Keeper, and they believe the Keeper bestows this magic on them. They remind me a bit of another fanatical faction in the series called The Witcher. You may be able to guess who I'm talking about. But yeah, not quite as good as Wizard's First Rule, but still a very good read. Speaking of The Witcher, we have The Last Wish. Time to piss some people off. I think The Last Wish is fine. I'm going to put it right here. It's above Dead of Bones. I didn't love this book, guys. I didn't love it. I really, really didn't. The translation felt very rough to me. The short stories themselves, most of them I didn't find super entertaining. And it almost made me not want to read more books from The Witcher. I'm very happy that I stuck with it and kept reading The Witcher, but The Last Wish almost made me not do so. I just did not enjoy my time with it. Luckily, The Sword of Destiny, on the other hand, is a completely different story. I'm going to put The Sword of Destiny here. This was a 5-star read. The short stories were great. The storytelling itself felt beautifully told. Like The Last Wish, it kind of introduced us to characters and helped establish their relationships, but I think it did a much better job of it. I love The Sword of Destiny in ways that I did not love The Last Wish. Now, here's kind of a weird take for a lot of folks. The Blood of Elves, this is one of the most hated books from what I've seen in the series. I really enjoyed it. I really, really enjoyed it. I'm going to put it in 4.5. I thought this was a great book. I actually prefer the novel storytelling of the Witcher books over the short story method, which, again, is kind of an unpopular opinion. But I really enjoyed this. I thought it did a great job kind of further building upon Geralt and Ciri's relationship, and then, of course, later Yennefer and Ciri's relationship near the end of the book, where that kind of gets set up. Seeing Geralt's true neutrality in the world was great. We got a little bit of monster hunting, which I really enjoyed. I liked Blood of Elves. I thought it was a fantastic read. And Time of Contempt, another book that a lot of people don't seem to love, I also thought was a very good read. I don't think it was as good as Blood of Elves, but seeing Yennefer and Ciri together was great. Ciri meandering around the desert for, as long as she did was slightly annoying, but I didn't hate it. The ending actually really intrigued me. It was problematic, make no mistake, but I want to learn more about what's going on here. With her and the rats. And so, yeah, I enjoyed The Time of Contempt. I think it's a good 4-star read. Vampire Hunter D is the last one that's going to get ranked. This is a graphic novel version, the manga version. Ordinarily, when I rank manga, they would be all together as one complete thing. But since the Vampire Hunter D manga are just graphic novel versions of the individual novels, they're standalone stories, not part of a continuous one, really. So I can rank this on its own. I'm going to put it right here. I think this is a good spot for it. It was beautifully illustrated. The story was decent. D is a mysterious character who I enjoyed, but it had a lot of problematic moments, which I didn't love. D is somewhat bland as a character, which I didn't love. And I don't really understand why some books feel the need to say that every character wants to throw themselves at the main character because he's just so impossibly handsome. That annoys me. Still going to read more. I own all 8 of the manga volumes, so I'm going to read them all. But I think this one's just a 3 out of 5. And again, I can't rank A Clash of Kings yet. I'm only about 300 some odd pages in. Where I'm at, if I were to rank it, it would be a 4 out of 5. but we'll see how it actually ranks at the end. So yeah, this has been my tier list of all the fantasy and sci-fi books that I have read over the last 2 years. I will update this again next year, leaving everything where you see it on screen and just placing new books where they fall. But until then, I will see you next time. Peace and take care.